There's a wonderful richness in all the readings today. The epistle actually goes along with the gospel and the Old Testament lesson, which is not always the case each week. In the Old Testament lesson, we meet up with Abram. Abram, who at a later point in life will become Abraham. But at this point, he is a man from a different country. He is not one of God's chosen at the time. He isn't from Israel. He's a stranger. And we see that God comes to an individual. And this is rare. What we see at the beginning of the Old Testament, of course, a couple weeks ago, or last week I should say, we saw God try to meet up and talk with that first couple, Adam and Eve, and talk to them about their being able to trust God. And of course we saw that they did not trust God. They couldn't. They were tempted. And they had to take a bite of that fruit. If we keep reading in Genesis after that, the next time it's Noah. God tries to speak to a peoples, a group, a collection, a community, and talks to them about being in relationship with him and what they need to do. And again, they fail. They end up a flood. Noah and his family being the faithful remnant that lives. God tries again. This time God talks to a bunch of people in a place where they're trying to build a tower that is so high that it reaches to heaven. Those people, the Tower of Babel. And what happens? They try to be more like God, and they fail as well. So now we see God is trying a different tact. No more trying to deal with a community, going to deal with an individual, and if not even somebody who's one of my people. At the time that God is speaking to Abram is 75 years old. Keep that in mind, 75. We're pretty set in our ways at 75. And God says to him, I want you to do something. I want you to pick up everything you own. I want you to take everything you know, and I want you to go someplace different. I want you to leave the comfort of your ancestral home. I want you to leave everything you know, and you're going to go someplace. And I'm not telling you where, but you'll know when you get there. Now think about that for a moment. 75 years old, his wife's almost as old, they have no children, because we know that Sarai, who becomes Sarah, is barren at this point. And this voice tells you to just give up everything, and if you do it, your descendants are going to be as great as the stars in the sky. Third window up here, this is Abraham with all the stars. As numerous as the stars in the sky, or the number of grains of sand. And Abram, in a moment of being able to think outside the box, and rather than stopping and saying, wait a minute, hold it, what do I have to give up? Why would I want to do this? I don't even know who you are. In a moment of remarkable faith, here's these words, these promises. I don't know if anybody's going to keep them. And does what he is told. He leaves the land of Ur, you are, and ends in the land of Canaan, which becomes Israel. And indeed, Abraham not only has descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and grains of sand, Abraham is the father of the three major religions of the world. Pretty impressive. But he showed faith. Faith, really. At an age where you should be able to say, sorry, set in my ways. Nope, I like the safety of what I know. May not be perfect, but I like it because I know it. And he becomes later in life from Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. And indeed, what happens? Eventually, now first he has a child by Hagar, his handmaiden, Ishmael. But eventually, Sarah and Abraham have a baby, and they named him Isaac, which means laughing one. And why? Because what happened was, when God comes and says, Sarah, I know you think you're barren at the age of 99, but you're going to have a baby boy. She laughed. So that's why she named him Isaac. So it goes to show, with God, all things are possible. Now in the epistle lesson today, we have the person who used to be Saul. Now Saul's job as an observant Jew in the beginning formations of what we now call Christianity was a person who would go and show who those Christians were underground. And in essence, he was fingering them for extermination. That was his job, to go find people who were part of that strange religion that was not the state religion and have them put to death. And as we know, at one point, Saul is on a road to Damascus. He's out to find more Christians. And he has scales grow over his eyes, and he loses his sight. And as he becomes healed over the process of a few days, not only do the scales fall away from his eyes so that he sees literally, but he sees figuratively. He understands the power of God and what God is meant to be in our lives. And he too is renamed to Paul. And he, as we hear in today's epistle lesson, says, what does Abraham show us? Abraham shows us a leap of faith that is greater than anything that any of us could ever know. And look what he got from it. Paul also made that leap of faith. And indeed, certainly walked the way of our Lord up until the time of his crucifixion. And that's Paul's crucifixion. But this morning we get Nicodemus in the gospel. And we meet Nicodemus in the dark. Now, Nicodemus is a member of the Sanhedrin, which is the temple elite. He has a lot of power. He's a Pharisee. He interprets the law. And his power at the time, because, as we know, Israel is occupied by the Romans, and that if he this much steps out of line, the Romans have made it clear, you keep things status quo. We don't want any rabble-rousing. You keep everybody calm. You can stay in business. You can have a living still. You can have a good life. But you keep everything in check. Well, meanwhile, what's happening out in the countryside is this man Jesus is walking around, and he's saying all kinds of things which are rabble-rousing, at the very least. And he's a little anxious about it. And yet at the same time, he's curiously intrigued. But he's gutless in many ways because he won't come out in the daytime to talk to Jesus. He's too afraid he'll be seen. And if he's seen, then he's probably going to lose his power. Or he could get booted out or whatever. So he comes at dark of night. And he says to Jesus, in essence, look, you know what? I know you're saying something of consequence that I think I'm interested in, and I want to know more. And I know you are who you say you are because of all the signs that you've shown us. In short, all the miracles that they've seen, all the teachings, all the healings. And Jesus right away is going to have none of this. Jesus isn't interested in somebody who wants to have a conversation about signs, about works. And Jesus takes the conversation in a different direction. And he starts trying to explain to Nicodemus that it's not about the work we do. It's not about how we go at doing things. It's about having faith, blind faith, and sometimes just being able to say, God, I am yours, and wherever you take me, I am willing to go. Nicodemus doesn't like this. Nicodemus wants to keep bringing this conversation back. Well, I don't understand. How can I be born again? How do you climb back into your mother's womb? Totally missing Jesus' point. Jesus saying it's about the Spirit. It's about the way that it enters you, enlivens you, and allows you to be strong, to be powerful, to be gutsy, to go forth into the world and let God lead you. It seemingly ends kind of on a bad note. We kind of wonder what happens to Nicodemus because he goes away kind of dejected because he really doesn't get it. Jesus says something about, just like Moses lifted serpents in the wilderness, that I have to be lifted up, and we all know what it meant when Jesus got lifted up because it was on a cross. Nicodemus goes away. Before I get to the end of the sermon, I want to tell you the good news for Nicodemus. In chapter 7 of John, Nicodemus is with the Sanhedrin, and they're talking about this man Jesus and how they have to get rid of him, why he's a danger. And Nicodemus kind of puts his toe in the water and talks about this man Jesus really being maybe just who we think he is. He doesn't say a whole lot, but he says enough to tip his hand that he's kind of feeling maybe that faith is going to grab him, it's going to take him. Well, we don't hear anything more about him until the end of the Gospel of John. And then we see something pretty remarkable. The end of the Gospel of John talks about Jesus being taken down off the cross. Joseph of Arimathea, who made the arrangements for Jesus to have a tomb, goes to get him, and Nicodemus goes with him. Nicodemus goes with 100 pounds of myrrh, which I can't even begin to tell you how expensive that was. He paid for it out of his pocket. And he paid to have that so that he personally could anoint Jesus at Jesus' death. Clearly, something got through to him. So here we are in the season of Lent where we hear this story about faith, their inability to have faith. And it's a tough thing to do, because I suspect all of us here in these pews at some time or another have found ourselves asking God for something and been bitterly disappointed, or had someone die that we didn't expect, somebody very sick, the job we lost, whatever, and we probably think, I trust you. I thought I trusted you, and you didn't give me what I needed. Right? And it's hard. Lent isn't a time about beating ourselves up and going into a phase like what we heard about earlier, that we heard on Ash Wednesday in terms of putting on the sad face and walking around and being stern. Lent is a time of self-examination. It's a time of us wandering in the wilderness. It's a time of us learning to let go of having to always be in control. And that's what this issue is about. How do we step away from all those things that give us our safety net? Those things that's okay, I hear what you're saying, but you know what? I'll just stay doing what I'm doing because it's safe and it's predictable and I know what's going to happen the next day and the next day, and just don't even ask me to change. Don't ask me to pick up and go move someplace else. Don't ask me to try something new that I've never tried before because I don't want to fail. Lent's our time to think about that. Lent's the time to think about how we can step out of ourselves, because this whole season is leading us up to this time of being born anew. What it means is shedding this old life that we live for the new life we can have. That's what Lent's about. So when we think about that Jesus on the cross, on Good Friday when we're standing at the base saying, uh-oh, this leap of faith didn't get me anywhere, believing in that, think 2 days after that with the resurrection. That's our promise. That's the promise. It's all about having the faith to believe that what we can't see, what we can't begin to imagine in this world is going to change. And it's going to be what God wants for us. In short, it isn't about what we earn. It's about what we learn to accept and what we accept. That's the secret of faith. Not trying to name it as we see it, but being able to accept it for what God gives us. And that is our story as Christians. In the name of the one who loves us and has given us life.